name is Celine de Cruz. She is a coordinator for Slum Dwellers International. Celine, would you just come up here for a moment before you get into your presentation mode? Because I said you would think she would be the perfect person. And she's good. But we don't have any actual slum dwellers in our conversation. It wasn't for want of trying. They actually had issues with their visas. We couldn't get their visas, their passports together, and they couldn't get here. And then when I was talking to Celine about this, she said, that is so typical. What do you mean by that, Celine?
I think it's very difficult for people who live in the north to understand that for people in the south, travel gets more and more difficult every day. We get stopped at every border. I walked into Bolivia once and I was punched in my stomach thinking they thought I had drugs on me. So our communities coming from the African countries and all have a very hard time. So unless they're accompanied or unless you make sure that they are routed through a particular way where they are, safe, it is a very humiliating experience.
It's a really obvious question, but tell us in a very descriptive way the difference between how you would talk about informal settlements, street life in this issue, and the way that Mohammed may have talked about it, who was going to join us in this conversation.
I think the issue of public spaces is a very political issue for poor communities. Because in a city where they are invisible and where they are not counted, and where they do not figure out in any master plans, communities have had to legitimize themselves and institutionalize their own processes and begin their negotiations with the city to be accepted and to find a space for themselves in the city, both socially and politically and spatially. And that's been the struggle of poor communities.
So what's the difference between, I have a feeling Mohammed would not have said that, right? He wouldn't have said it in that way.
Who, Mohammed?
Yes, he was going to come from Uganda. Yeah.
He would have said exactly this.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so now we set the scene, and now we've explained why we don't have any slum dwellers actually in this conversation. Do tell us what you would like to share with us, Celine de Cruz.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that you're not going to hear their voice, but I'm going to try my best to represent my colleagues who are not here and the rest of my network from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So can I start now, Femi?
Yes, you may start.
Okay. So I have 23 slides here. I can finish them in 7 minutes or 20 minutes or half an hour. Sorry. That goes fast already. Okay. So this is what I'm going to cover in my talk today. I'm going to give you examples of about 3 or 4 community projects, which are public projects within these communities, informal communities, and an emphasis on the tools that the federations of the urban poor have been using to mobilize themselves over the last 20 years. So Slum Dwellers International is a network of slum dwellers. It's not a network of people like me. People like me from the outside support the Slum Dwellers Network. And the network now covers over 34 countries in Africa, mostly in Africa, few countries in Asia, and a very young movement in Latin America. In fact, very nascent. The focus of the network has been to mobilize and to network around issues of land, which is their most pressing issue, and basic services in the settlements that they live. So like I said, with the growing prices of land, especially in the mega cities and in the cities of the South, the poor get peripheralized and get pushed further and further away from the city center. And it is a constant battle of having to negotiate their livelihoods and their space of where they live. And this is at the crux of the issues that the urban poor face, whether it is Latin America or Africa or Asia. They're constantly having to negotiate to make sure that their space where they live is close and close as possible to their livelihood spaces. So some of the tools that the Federation has developed over time, so there's a slogan in the Federation. In the South Africans say, Amandla Imali Nolwazi. It means power is in money and information. So the poor have realized that the more they are able to get their act together and put their small monies together and put their information together, they are better their ability to be able to negotiate with the city authorities. So far, these are our latest statistics, but it's growing every day. And these are community savings and not a microcredit enterprise. So the whole idea is that the community comes around saving, but you're using the space for savings to be able to solve your everyday problems. Women talk about what happens in their homes. They're able to deal with, if they don't have food in the house, they're able to talk to their neighbors. They get beaten up by their husbands. They're able to share that with other women. So it's like a support group. So it's more than savings. And that is why it sustains by itself, because it's not just a bank. It's more than a bank. And over time, you will see through the projects that I explain that this small money was able to leverage larger amounts of money from the city officials, from other banks, to be able to work on the projects that I will be showing you. So one of the campaigns that the Federation has recently been involved with is Know Your City, and it basically means counting every single informal settlement in the city. And what does that actually entail? It entails not just collecting data, but it entails collecting people, collecting leaders from all these communities, building this network, creating a voice and an identity for slum dwellers in their city. So a very important exercise besides community savings is community profiling. And when I say profiling, it's basically a picture of the settlement. So what does it mean? The history of the settlement, where do people migrate from, how many times they were evicted, what kind of occupations the men do, what kind of occupations the women do the children go to school or not, do they have health facilities, is there a marketplace, where do they go if they need small loans? So just to get a basic sense of how the community responds to its basic needs. These are not household surveys, it's a settlement survey. And as you see, communities are not waiting for governments and professionals. You walk into a city, you find your own hut somewhere, you find your space, you know some uncle, you know some godfather, you walk into a settlement. Over years, you have developed that settlement, built it, invested in it, and you've created your own spaces. And then one fine day, you have government comes along, evicts you. And then you have to start from scratch and put all those resources back from scratch. So this is just to give you an idea of how settlements grow and how settlements take responsibility for their own planning within their settlements. These are examples, and there are many examples. This is just Pune here. But there are many examples of communities in many cities today through the Slum Dwellers Federation network trying to work out plans and alternative plans. So when you go to the city, you don't go empty-handed. You say, I have my savings, I have my information, here is an alternative plan, can we talk? All we need you, city, to do is facilitate this process, give us the land, and we'll make it easy and find a solution that works for the city and works for communities. So these are examples of communities that are highly dense. And this is an example where the community is sitting and restructuring its space and trying to find open spaces within the existing slum. So it means realigning, shifting, moving, reblocking certain houses to create those spaces. Something that is impossible to do, because when you see a slum, it's like, oh my God, where do you begin? But when you live in that community, you know exactly how to tackle your own issues. This is the same example where part of that community, because it was so tight and dense, and they lived in like 30 square feet, very, very small spaces. That's 10 by 3? Yeah, 10 by 3. So by going multi-storied, but not very high, just 3 or 4 floors, they were able to get more space to live, but they were also able to open up the spaces in front of their houses. So that increased the amount of open space, but it also gave them more space within their house. This is an example where they have realigned their houses, reblocked, and on the right-hand side, you will see that that's the actual development. With wider roads, even that wider space for children to play, though it's a road, makes a huge difference. So this is another example of how the community has worked towards creating and designing community toilets that are not just toilets, but they're like communication centers. It's a place where the women, you know, when you're standing in a toilet in Bombay, you're standing in a long queue. And then the women are gossiping, you know, who's had an affair with whom last night, you're talking about your neighbor, you're bitching about somebody. So those queues are used for multi-purpose for many things. So the community decided, why not have a community toilet in a way where we have a community center on the top. So that actually keeps the place clean, because you don't want us to be sitting above a stinky place. And it's a safe space around the toilet for children to play, and, you know, so it just becomes, it changes the whole texture and the nature of what a toilet is meant to be. Now, these are examples which the city loves, because the city finds it very hard to be able to maintain and look after such spaces without community involvement. You can't just get a contractor to come and build a toilet. It breaks down in 5 years and it becomes no man's land. So this is the advantage when communities participate in their own design. You have well-lit toilets, well-designed toilets. Children can play in those spaces. The mothers come and have their meetings in the community center upstairs. So it's just good for everybody. This is another example of a toilet in the Kampala city. But this is a market toilet, once again designed by the community. So this is the informal market within the informal community, and the community decided that because there were so many people going up and down that market every day, including the vendors and the buyers, they needed to construct a community toilet right there near the market. So completely, once again, with the resources that they got from the urban poor funds. I will talk about that a little more in a while. But the city gave you permission for the land. And see, that is most important. If you don't have the support of the city, you cannot take many of these things forward. And I think the mayor ahead is going to tell us more about how she supports her communities in Indonesia. But many people say, oh, you guys get co-opted by government. But honestly, the government is ours. And if whoever is there, we don't care whether it's right-wing or left-wing. As far as the poor is concerned, you don't care who gives you toilet and who gives you water and who gives you a house. You will go to anybody and negotiate. So this is an example where communities go with proper plans and go in front and sit in front of their offices and say, can we look at these options? And it's embarrassing sometimes for city governments because they have not even thought about this. They have not done their homework. So when communities do their homework and go prepared with, financial homework, a design homework, cities respond, they listen because you're strengthening their hands, you're making them look good, you're telling them we are going to do this together, you don't allow them to lose face. This is an example of a community center in Lusaka in Zambia. Recently I visited this place and it's wonderful because they use it for weddings and ceremonies and they rent it out and make lots of money on the space. But basically, it's a space that every day the women can come, hang out, they sleep under the fan, they cook their food, they gossip, they save, they solve their problems, they create. So they're doing so many things in that space which is theirs because you don't have that space in your crowded community because it's so tight and small. So one of the tools that SDI has designed over time has been the Urban Poor Funds. And the Urban Poor Fund basically leverages funds, soft and hard money from different sources, and it's a fund for slum upgrading. So communities are able to take this fund and take this money, go to cities and see what cities can give them and use and start. Because most of our cities are poor, they don't have money. So even if they have the best of intentions, sometimes they cannot help you. But if you are able to show them 1 or 2 pilots, then the city gets enthusiastic and then wants to invest in that process and build on that process. So this is the future. This is what we want to do in the future. We want to be able to transform informal markets. I spoke about this last year in Stockholm. I'm talking about this again this year. We really look forward to the support of the UN Habitat to be able to make this an important theme because livelihoods and shelter are very closely connected and you cannot separate these two themes. So if you're actually able to show 1 or 2 pilots of informal markets along with city officials and the city mayors who are supporting this kind of a process, we can set a precedent and we can set a precedent that works for cities all over. These are some of the homework and the data that the communities have collected. It's called the informal market profiles. This is a market in Ghana, in Asham and Accra. They are again making their own plans. They're talking to their city officials. You see women here sitting all day without a toilet. No facilities. They bring their children there. They're just hanging out. So now in the new design, they're thinking of having a play, what do you call it? A play school for their children, a leisure center, toilets. So facilities that help the community as well as helps the city. Kampala, again here the local councillor and the municipality is supporting this project, and the designs are already out there, and between the private sector and the city, the Federation is trying to see how it can find resources to actually kickstart this process. So any support from UN Habitat on this front would be great. Even ideas support, professional support. What kind, there's so much of talk about markets. It'll be good to see how we can take some of the principles of how markets get formed and translate it in the informal. This is one of the plans that they have made for the Kinawataka market. Yeah, so basically slum dwellers are not aliens falling from somewhere else. They are like you and me. They just don't have the resources, so they live in slums. If they had the money, they'd be living in big houses. And so I don't think there is that huge divide. And if you're talking about the growth of the city and the health of the city, unless we think of each other, it's not going to happen. And slum dwellers have economically and socially contributed to cities, and we've all seen that, and we know that they're a huge asset to our cities and not a liability.
Don't go anywhere. I heard that Slum Dwellers International have been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. I heard it because Celine told me. How does that happen?
I think it's great because, slum dwellers don't reach those levels. Normally, some professional or some middle-class person like me or somebody else gets it. The poor themselves are never acknowledged for all the stuff that they do. So for me, this is great that the Nobel Peace Prize Committee actually acknowledged a slum dweller in Jokan Arputam, who's the president of this movement, and Slum Dwellers International, which is a movement of the urban poor. It's huge.
Wow. There's something that, as I was listening to your presentation, you did a sort of shout out to UN Habitat. It wasn't very subtle.
No.
What are you actually getting at?
I feel these are opportunities where organizations like the UN Habitat can make a difference by setting a precedent, by showing how something can be done differently, not just in terms of a policy document, not just in terms of declarations, but actually doing something on the ground. You can set a trend, you can set a precedent, you can show other institutions like the World Bank and other bilaterals that it's actually possible to do that and take it to scale.